A young reporter believed he could rattle JD Vance, yet he never anticipated the astonishing response that awaited him. The elegant banquet room at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Chicago unfolded like an opulent painting, with the light from dazzling crystal chandeliers dancing across the soaring ceiling and casting shimmering reflections onto the glossy marble floor. The space was imbued with the scent of premium bourbon, delicate hints of fine cologne, and a trace of nervous excitement as powerful figures from the American media and political spheres gathered. Guests in impeccably tailored suits and resplendent evening gowns moved gracefully between the banquet tables, their voices blending into a whispered symphony of calculated murmurs. Idle chatter about power, polite laughter intermingled with a touch of sarcasm. Some had come for noble reasons. Tonight's event was organized to raise funds for programs supporting veterans overcoming psychological trauma, yet for many others, it was merely a stage for display, an opportunity to network or reinforce their standing among the elite. Then JD Vance appeared. Without any bodyguards or ostentation, he emerged in a perfectly fitted dark gray suit, his jacket sleeves casually falling at his sides, exuding a calm authority that needed no introduction. At 40, he walked with the confidence of a man who had weathered many a political storm, his keen eyes sweeping across the room like a strategist assessing a battlefield. The atmosphere subtly shifted as he advanced. Several conversations halted mid-sentence, and discreet gazes turned his way. He was not the sort of man to inspire empty admiration. You simply felt his presence, a natural respect that required no demand. He approached a small group near the bar, warmly shaking hands with a few old acquaintances, his deep, mellow voice rising as he leaned in to listen over the soft strains of acoustic music that filled the space. He did not care for meaningless pleasantries, yet he possessed the rare talent of making those he encountered feel that their stories were worthy of appreciation. An uncommon quality amid this dazzling crowd. In a corner of the room, a young reporter named Ethan Parker observed. He was not yet a household name, but in online journalism he was steadily making his mark with sharp articles often aimed at conservative political figures he deemed outdated. His social media posts, laden with biting critiques, had earned him a considerable following. Tonight, he sensed an opportunity. To Ethan, JD Vance was a relic of the past, a senator hailing from Appalachia, representing values he believed no longer held a place in modern society. Ethan was determined to make his mark, and the smug glint in his eyes revealed that he was convinced of his impending victory in this confrontation. He hadn't come to make conversation, he had come to take down his target, yet he had no inkling of who he was about to face. Ethan Parker adjusted his tie, quickly checked that his phone was recording in his jacket pocket, and confidently wove his way through the crowd. Without hesitation, he strode forward with the assured step of a predator closing in on its prey. This wasn't merely an attempt to criticize a politician. It was meant to create a breakthrough moment, a video clip that could go viral across social media. As he neared the bar, the atmosphere around him seemed to shift. Several guests stepped back as if sensing an impending surge. JD Vance, absorbed in listening to a veteran recount his time in Afghanistan, appeared entirely unconcerned by the young man's arrival. That only steeled Ethan's resolve further. Clearing his throat, Ethan flashed a confident, slightly provocative smile. "Senator Vance," he announced, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "I'm Ethan Parker from Liberty Pulse. May I have a few minutes of your time for an interview?" JD Vance glanced at him briefly, his look short yet as sharp as a knife, then calmly returned to the conversation at hand. Ethan frowned, dissatisfied with being ignored. He stepped closer, his tone still polite but laced with a cutting edge. "It won't take long, sir," he said, his smile hardening. "I'm simply curious to hear your thoughts on America today. You've been in the Senate for several years, written books, run campaigns. Do you really think men like you still have a place in this day and age?" That question struck like a covert arrow, the phrase, "men like you," hanging in the air, laden with irony. A few nearby guests turned their heads, their curiosity piqued. A middle-aged man set his glass down on the table, the clink of glass on wood resonating harshly. Even the bartender paused, the bottle of liquor in his hand momentarily suspended in midair. Finally, JD Vance fixed his gaze on Ethan, his eyes as calm as a lake before a storm, as though he were weighing whether this young man was worth his attention. Ethan did not stop. "I mean," he continued, his tone now even sharper, "America is changing rapidly. The rigid conservative ideas and traditional leadership you represent, many say they are obsolete. Have you ever considered that the younger generation might want something new?" This was the decisive blow Ethan had prepared, a question meticulously crafted to corner JD Vance. He stood there, his phone still recording, his eyes waiting for a flustered or angry reaction from his opponent. He had imagined JD Vance stammering, losing his composure before the crowd. But he was mistaken. JD Vance was not a man easily shaken. In that fleeting moment, JD Vance simply looked at Ethan, not with anger or annoyance, but with a deep, penetrating gaze that made his opponent question himself. A heavy silence stretched out, slowly and profoundly filling the space, drawing every eye within earshot. JD Vance then let out a gentle sigh, not a sigh of exhaustion, but one that expressed absolute indifference. He reached out and picked up the bourbon glass from the bar, took a slow sip, the hint of oak wafting over, then set the glass down with a soft clink before speaking. "You've been rehearsing that line all night in front of the mirror, haven't you, kid?" A ripple of laughter spread through the nearby group, a light yet piercing sound like a chime resonating in the luxurious. Ethan Parker clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, yet he still tried to maintain a calm exterior. "I'm merely asking the questions everyone is wondering about, sir," he replied, his voice straining to sound resolute. JD Vance tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as if weighing each word. "Is it everyone or just you and your online buddies?" he repeated, his deep voice savoring the word as though testing its flavor on his tongue. Ethan froze, his gaze flickering. This was not part of his perfect plan. The senator rested his elbows on the bar, his body leaning forward slightly, the light from the chandelier sparkling on his chiseled features. "Do you really think this world advances just because some guy with a smartphone shouts a few words? That if you just point and say, 'That's old, get rid of it, everything will change?'" Ethan's mouth opened as if to retort, but JD Vance wouldn't let him interrupt. "Listen here, kid," his voice was steady and cold. A warning honed by years in the political arena. "You can't just erase the past because it doesn't suit you. You have to face it, learn from it, keep what's good, fix what's broken, and then move on. That is evolution, not the little farce you're putting on here." He casually waved his hand in Ethan's direction, a gesture mimicking the arrogant flourish the young man had shown earlier. The crowd's laughter now rang out more clearly, with one person even whistling in approval. Ethan's face flushed bright red, yet he still refused to yield. "With all due respect, Senator Vance," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he struggled to maintain his arrogance, "talking about learning from the past is easy when you belong to a generation that was handed everything on a silver platter, a generation that shaped this world to its liking." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the room, but no one took Ethan's side. A few guests exchanged looks, shaking their heads in exasperation at his immature argument. JD Vance chuckled, a short, dry laugh, as though he had just heard a joke not worth his concern. "Handed everything?" he repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I grew up in the impoverished hills of Ohio, worked my fingers to the bone in the military before stepping into politics. Do you think it was all handed to you on a silver platter?" He paused, letting the question hang like a cutting remark. "Have you ever had to work under a 104-degree sun just to earn money for dinner?" Ethan blinked, stunned into silence. But JD Vance was not finished. "I've met plenty of folks like you," he continued, taking another sip of bourbon, his eyes as sharp as if they could see right through. "Chasing after a clever soundbite, dreaming of a viral moment. But the problem is, you came in here intending to take me down, thinking I'd lose my cool or stumble. I'm sorry," he shrugged lightly, "but I don't dance to your script. That's your show." The crowd erupted in laughter, clapping and cheering throughout the banquet hall. Ethan felt the weight of pressure crushing him. his confidence beginning to shatter like cracked glass. He forced a smile and straightened his posture, as if trying to salvage some semblance of authority, but in truth he had long been defeated without even realizing it. He cleared his throat, seeking a way out. "All right, perhaps you did struggle," he said in a weakened tone. "But don't you think your generation, forgotten in today's modern politics, has its reasons? Maybe people are simply fed up with this outdated, stuffed-in conservative mindset?" JD Vance gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Forgotten?" he repeated, shaking his head as if to dispel a foolish notion. "Kid, I've survived more elections and faced more criticism than you can count. And here I am, still sitting. And you, standing in front of me at this party, using my name to try and score some clout?" Ethan had no answer. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Someone in the crowd murmured, "How pathetic." That moment stretched on, the weight of it pressing down on Ethan like a boulder. The onlookers no longer cheered him, they watched him struggle in defeat. The silence grew oppressive, causing Ethan to panic and search for a retreat. "I just thought that people deserve something better," he finally blurted out, his voice trailing off. "New ideas, new values." "Better," JD Vance interrupted with a slow, meaningful nod. "Then give me one," he said. Ethan was taken aback. "One what?" he stammered. "Just offer something more valuable than what I've done. More than the policies I fought for. More than the history I helped create," JD Vance said, leaning back with a relaxed demeanor, as though he were already assured of his victory. His words hit like a powerful blow, echoing in the stillness of the room. Ethan had nothing to counter with. His hands trembled lightly, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. All his game had been about dragging others down, but now, before JD Vance, he was forced to prove himself, and he was empty. A bead of sweat trailed down his forehead, catching the chandelier's light as if marking his shame. He tried to shrug off the sensation of the room closing in, the whispers spreading, his plan unraveling. "I suppose so," JD Vance said gently, yet coldly, raising his glass once more. The crowd laughed again, their laughter now imbued with finality. The confrontation was over. Ethan had lost, and he knew it. Ethan Parker swallowed hard, the heat of shame spreading across his face. He had entered this battle believing he would become the icon of a new generation, but now he stood exposed. Just a young man who had been too arrogant before a man who had weathered every trial. The conversation in the room gradually returned to its normal rhythm, laughter resuming in pockets here and there, yet occasionally eyes still turned his way, some with amusement, some with pity, others with cold indifference. Ethan despised that final look the most, for it meant that he wasn't even worthy of anyone's concern. Without another word, he turned on his heel and silently merged back into the crowd. No goodbyes, no final words, no grand finale. Just a man who had played too roughly and lost in front of an audience. JD Vance watched Ethan Parker leave in silence, his face as calm as a placid lake, showing not the slightest hint of the thoughts hidden within. He did not flaunt a victory, nor did he smile in self-satisfaction, not even appearing particularly affected by the confrontation that had just unfolded. He simply relaxed and took another sip of bourbon, the subtle aroma of oak drifting by, then turned back to the veteran standing beside him and continued the conversation as if nothing had been interrupted. "Come on, my friend," he said, his voice deep, warm, and unruffled, as if nothing significant had just occurred. "You were telling us about your days in Kabul." And so, that moment passed gently, like a soft breeze wafting through the elegant banquet room at the Ritz-Carlton, Chicago. But just a few steps away, a middle-aged man, Jack Morrison, a seasoned political consultant, shook his head and let out a chuckle. "You know, JD," he said with evident delight, "you didn't really have to reduce that kid to shambles like that." JD Vance raised an eyebrow, his eyes flickering with a trace of curiosity. "I didn't do anything," he replied evenly, as if discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. Jack smirked, a half-smile full of implication. "Oh, come on now, you just lured that kid right into a perfect trap." Finally, JD Vance allowed a faint smile to break through, his eyes gleaming with a rare, mischievous spark. "He chose his own path," he said in a low, sharp tone. "I just stood still and let him fall on his own." Jack burst into hearty laughter, a refined chuckle that rang out amid the gentle strains of acoustic music, nodding in agreement. "But you know," he continued, his voice suddenly dropping as though sharing a secret, "they're going to twist this whole story. They'll paint you as a cold-hearted conservative, a bully who picks on a young reporter." JD Vance shrugged lightly, his manner relaxed as if the matter were unworthy of concern. "They've been slapping that label on me for decades," he said simply, "but the truth doesn't change." On the other side of the room, another guest, Sarah Collins, whispered to her companion, "Oh my God, these people really think they can go toe-to-toe with JD Vance?" Her companion, a sharp-featured woman named Emily Harper, laughed softly and shook her head in exasperation. "They just keep trying," she replied with a note of sarcasm. "But they all end up falling flat the same way." The evening continued in the familiar atmosphere of Chicago's elite. Glasses of red wine swirling under the lights, hushed whispers of political strategy emerging from the corners of the tables, and the murmur of the upper crust filling the space. Yet one lesson remained, not only for Ethan Parker but for anyone who had witnessed that exchange. It wasn't a matter of partisanship, nor of age, nor simply about winning or losing. It was a battle between hard-won experience and youthful arrogance. JD Vance had seen it all: the hard days in Appalachia, the battles fought on the political stage, the failures, the successes, and the resilience to get back up after every fall. He understood something many people forget: the loudest person in the room is rarely the one with anything worthwhile to say. Ethan Parker, by contrast, belonged to a world where ostentatious outrage was the currency of value, where criticizing others came far more easily than building anything substantial. He had come here thinking that a few sharply aimed insults could bring down a man like JD Vance. But the flaw in nothing but tearing others down is that it doesn't prove you've created anything at all. And that was exactly Ethan's mistake. He spent his time waiting for others to stumble rather than learning how to stand firmly on his own 2 feet. When he quietly withdrew from the party, his figure fading into the crowd, he was just another name on the long list of those who had underestimated the Ohio senator. JD Vance didn't need to prove anything. He never had. He let his actions speak for him, allowing time to judge true worth and letting those who tried to erase the past fade away into insignificance. Because, in the end, it isn't the one who shouts the loudest who wins. It's the one who truly has something to say. The world is full of people chasing after moments of downfall, ready to criticize, ready to dismiss, yet slow to create value. But the truth remains: dragging others down doesn't make you greater, while building something truly new is the mark of wisdom and lasting success. JD Vance then watched Ethan Parker leave in silence, his face as calm as a still lake, offering no clue whatsoever as to the thoughts hidden within. He didn't parade his victory, nor did he flash a self-satisfied smile. He didn't even seem particularly interested in the showdown that had just taken place. He simply leisurely took another sip of bourbon, the aroma of oak drifting by, then turned back to the veteran standing beside him and continued the conversation as if the interruption had never occurred. "Come on, my friend," he said, his voice deep, warm, and unhurried, as if nothing noteworthy had just happened. "You were talking about your days in Kabul, weren't you?" And just like that, the moment passed, as gently as a breeze through the luxurious banquet room at the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago. Yet just a few steps away, a middle-aged man, Jack Morrison, a veteran political consultant, shook his head and chuckled. "You know, JD," he said with evident pleasure, "you didn't have to reduce that kid to shambles like that." JD Vance raised one eyebrow, his eyes flickering with a hint of curiosity. "I didn't do anything," he replied evenly, as if commenting on the weather. Jack smirked, a half-smile full of meaning. "Oh, come on now, you just lured that kid right into a perfect trap." Finally, JD Vance allowed a faint smile to appear, his eyes sparkling with a rare, mischievous glint. "He chose his own path," he said in a low, sharp tone. I merely stood still and let him fall on his own. Jack burst into hearty laughter, a refined chuckle echoing amidst the gentle strains of acoustic music, nodding in agreement. "But you know," he continued, his voice suddenly dropping as though sharing a secret, "they're going to twist this whole affair. They'll portray you as a cold-hearted conservative, a bully who picks on a young reporter." JD Vance shrugged lightly, his manner as relaxed as if the matter were trivial. "They've been labeling me that way for decades," he said plainly. "But the truth remains unchanged." On the other side of the room, another guest, Sarah Collins, whispered to her friend, "Oh my God, these people really think they can spar with JD Vance." Her friend, a sharp-featured woman named Emily Harper, laughed softly and shook her head in exasperation. "They just keep trying," she replied with biting sarcasm, "but they all end up falling the same way." The evening carried on in the familiar atmosphere of Chicago's elite. Glasses of red wine rippling under the lights, hushed whispers about political strategy echoing from the corners of tables, and the murmur of high society filling the space. Yet one lesson lingered, not only for Ethan Parker, but for anyone who had witnessed that exchange. It wasn't about partisanship, nor about age, nor simply about winning or losing. It was a battle between hard-won experience and youthful arrogance. JD Vance had seen every rise and fall, those hard days in Appalachia, the battles on the political stage, the failures, the successes, and the grit to rise after every fall. He understood something many forgot. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one with anything worthwhile to say. Ethan Parker, on the other hand, belonged to a world where ostentatious indignation was the currency of value, where it was easier to criticize others than to build something substantial. He had come in believing that a few sharply delivered insults could take down a man like JD Vance. But the error in merely tearing others down is this: it doesn't prove you've created anything at all. And that indeed was Ethan's mistake. He spent his time waiting for others to stumble instead of learning how to stand firm on his own 2 feet. When he quietly withdrew from the party, his figure receding into the crowd, he was just another name on the long list of those who had underestimated the Ohio senator. JD Vance never needed to prove anything. He never had. He let his actions speak for him, allowed time to judge true worth, and let those who tried to erase the past fade into insignificance. Because, ultimately, it isn't the one who shouts the loudest who wins, it's the one who truly has something to say. The world is filled with those who hunt for moments to knock others down, ready to criticize, eager to dismiss, yet slow to create genuine value. But the truth remains, dragging others down doesn't elevate you, while building something truly new is the essence of wisdom and lasting success. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts about the story and let us know which city you're watching from. We'd love for you to share its message by liking and sharing it with your friends, helping us reach our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers, which means the world to us and allows us to create more meaningful stories for you. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you in our next story.